Start by going over the meeting details. So good evening, my name is Dave Cronin, city engineer, and I'm here with city staff members Dustin Smith and Allie Weems. We will work alongside Pat Collette, the chair, to facilitate the Multi-modal Transportation Commission meeting this evening. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, when you are not participating, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, we may mute or unmute people as needed to minimize distractions during the meeting. Please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. You can turn your video on and off by clicking on the video icon on the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on when you are participating in the meeting. When you are not participating, it is okay to turn your video off. Just remember to turn your video back on when you are participating. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. Individuals who registered in advance to provide public comments remotely will be called upon by name. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comments for those who are physically present. Staff will direct them to this podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each member individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. So I guess I'll start by turning up the meeting over to the MMTC chair, Pat Collette.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. We have on our agenda tonight a study session to talk about the strategic plan and budget update. And I believe that is that Danielle that's going to make that presentation?
Yes, this is Dave Cronin, city engineer. Danielle's going to make that presentation this evening. I think we're by doing a quick roll call, and Allie will go through and do a quick roll call, then we'll turn it over to Danielle.
Great, thank you.
Allie Weems, MSO. Charlie Bryan.
Present.
Gregory Critchlow.
Steve Evans.
Here.
Carol Bowen. Nick Kuzmiak.
Here.
Tom Allen.
Present.
Aaron Payton. Lauren Freeman. Pat Collette.
Here.
Alrighty. That's 5.
All right. All right. Well, we're going to turn it over to Danielle Buschkoetter, who is going to give us an overview of the city's strategic plan and budget. Danielle, go ahead.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. I'm Danielle Buschkoetter. I'm the Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator for the City of Lawrence. I appreciate the invitation to come before you all this evening to give a brief update about the strategic plan and the budget. So I put together what hopefully is a relatively brief presentation for you all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here quickly. And we'll get this in presentation mode. And we will jump into the presentation. Please feel free at the end to ask any questions that you may have. I certainly want to leave some time at the end for questions as well. I know you all have a couple other things on your agenda tonight, so we will jump on into it. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the history of our strategic plan. I'm going to first focus on the strategic plan and then kind of jump over to the budget. Ultimately, these things are all interrelated, but We'll start first with the strategic plan and the history of that. So the city did adopt a strategic plan back in 2017. This was really the city's first strategic plan and was intended to really guide the city over the next 2 to 3 years. As we were getting into kind of the middle of 2019, we realized that we really needed to start working on a process to update our strategic plan. So by the end of 2019, and if we can think back to early 2020, this is really when this work got underway. And we also knew with this new strategic plan that focusing on public engagement was really going to be important. So we could get that input on the front end of that process and use that to inform the rest of the process instead of getting it on the back end of the process and having the community really react to the work that had already been done. So we went through a pretty large public outreach effort. This was all pre-COVID, so we had a lot of in-person meetings. These were actually some of the last in-person meetings that we had. So we actually went through quite a robust process. We put together an internal Lawrence Listens team. We were hoping to get about 20 trained staff members to go out into the community and kind of meet people where they are. And instead, we had over 45 people volunteer to be a part of our Lawrence Listens team. And so we trained all of these city staff to help facilitate public engagement activities. Ultimately, it was a really incredible effort, and we heard from more than 3,000 people throughout this process. And we did all of that in about a 4-week time frame. And we estimate we had about 100 hours of public engagement over the course of those 4 weeks, which is pretty incredible. And we did this through a variety of different things. We had kind of those traditional community meetings that we held at different locations across the city. You can see a picture here of one of these facilitated meetings that we had at the Carnegie Building. We also had different satellite meetings. So we try to get in different facilities in different parts of town. And these were really designed to be a little bit smaller in nature. And we had those at some of the depots and some of our parks and recreation centers and those sorts of things. We also had a number of small group meetings. So there are a number of organizations in our community that meet monthly or weekly or however often. And we had facilitators go out to those kind of regularly scheduled meetings that people were already having and use that as an opportunity to gather public input. And then we also did some of the traditional online surveys, tabling events, and we also did some community check-in meetings. So all of these initial meetings happened kind of pre-COVID. So we wanted to do another set of engagement activities that were virtual to kind of see whether or not the priorities that we heard were still holding true for folks. And by and large, we found out that yes, they were still holding true. We also did, and it's not noted here, but something I want to highlight to you all is we also, in one of our small group meetings, we invited all of the advisory board chairs and vice chairs to come and participate in a facilitated meeting. So that was one of the ways kind of on the front end that we tried to also hear from our advisory board members because they obviously you all put a lot of time and effort into participating in our community in this way. So that was a really important voice that we wanted to also capture on the front end. This is kind of a visual representation of our strategic plan framework. So ultimately, the strategic plan outlines a systematic process for moving towards a vision in a manner that involves development and prioritization of strategic goals with measurable strategies. So this is a bit of a visualization of that to acknowledge that we have some plans like our comprehensive plan, which is looks far beyond the kind of 3 to 5 years that our strategic plan is supposed to look. So recognizing that comprehensive plan is helping to inform our strategic plan, which ultimately impacts, like I mentioned, these things are interwoven, our annual operating budget. And that really enables us to have strategic management and have key performance indicators that we're able to utilize. And we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But that's how some of these different elements kind of interrelate to one another. I want to kind of start this off with our mission, vision, and values. So our mission statement, and this was also updated as we went through this last strategic plan update, is to create a community where all enjoy life and feel at home. So that's really that kind of driving force, along with our vision, which has been in place for a number of years now, and our organizational values as well. So I think it's important to recognize these as we talk about and kind of frame our strategic plan discussion. So one of the other elements of our strategic plan is we have outcomes identified in it, and we also have commitments. So our outcomes are what we do. So you can think of these kind of as the services we provide in our community, whereas our commitments are how we do that work. So this is more of kind of those internal functions that we have to keep in mind and recognize as we work towards all of these different outcomes. So it's really important for us to remember and not to lose sight of the way that we do our work, or our commitments are really just as important as what we do, and those are the outcomes. So we'll go through each of our 5 outcome statements and 6 commitment areas that will hopefully help kind of put some context to that statement a little bit more. So we're going to start with our outcomes. So the first one, and in no particular order, is unmistakable identity. So Lawrence is a welcoming community synonymous with arts, diverse culture, fun, and a quintessential downtown. City parks and community events contribute to the vibrancy experienced by all people in Lawrence. So that is our unmistakable identity. We also have strong, welcoming neighborhoods. So all people in Lawrence live in safe, functional, and aesthetically unique neighborhoods that provide opportunities to lead healthy lifestyles with access to safe and affordable housing and essential services that help them thrive. Safe and secure really speaks to Lawrence being a community where people feel safe and secure with access to trusted public and community-based safety resources. Prosperity and economic security is our next outcome area. And this really speaks to the city fostering an environment that provides all people and businesses the opportunity for economic security and intentionally acknowledges, removes, and prevents barriers created by systemic and institutional injustice. Our community succeeds because of collective prosperity and a vibrant, sustainable local economy. And then finally, connected city. And this is probably one that you all are going to be talking about quite a bit in all of your work. This was changed from infrastructure, asset management, and connectivity. This is a little bit easier to get to fit on charts and to talk about. So this is one that may have looked a little different as you all have kind of talked about the strategic plan previously, but has been updated. So I wanted to make that note. So this is really articulating that the city of Lawrence has a well-maintained, functional, and efficient infrastructure, facilities, and assets, connectivity that supports accessible, sustainable methods for safely moving people and information throughout the community and the region. Investments in these assets reflect the city's commitment to contribute to the well-being of all people. So those are our outcomes. That's what we do as a city. So next we're going to go through the commitments, and I'll try to go through these relatively quick as well. But this is really how do we do that work? So you can kind of think about these as the different lenses that we have to keep in mind and consider as we work towards those different outcome areas. And so the first is community engagement. So that's really engaging with our community to drive action and build trust in city government, and really inviting people and community members to collaborate and innovate with us through strong, equitable engagement with our community and sharing and receiving information about important city services and community life. The next is related to efficient and effective processes. So this is being intentional and consistent about how we deliver city services. And we focus on process improvement by working collaboratively to understand needs, research, adapt and develop successful solutions. Trustworthy processes are the foundation for the delivery of city services. The next one is equity and inclusion. And I know this is something that you all have talked about before as well. So really that fair and impartial delivery of services so that no group is disadvantaged or burdened, along with having inclusive representation and participation for all. Inclusion and racial equity drive the culture of our organization and our community. When we intentionally prioritize race, it can no longer be used to predict life outcomes, and outcomes are improved for all. We remove systemic barriers to reconcile historic injustices and their continued presence in our work. Next, we have sound fiscal stewardship. So this is the efficient use and sustainable management of resources that align with community priorities. So this is really focused on building and maintaining public trust while using our resources to achieve high value, and providing transparent, easy access to relevant and accurate data for budgeting and decision making. Engaged and empowered teams. So this is really our workforce, and people throughout the organization are trusted, supported, and cared for as we build community together, really investing in and cultivating service to our community, individual growth, team development, respect, and trust, acknowledging that our very best is achieved by a diverse, engaged, collaborative, and innovative organizational culture. And then the last slide I will read to you this evening is environmental sustainability. So I know this is another area that you all have talked about in some of your previous work as well. So really having a deep respect for our place and relationship with the planet and the environment. We consider the environmental consequences of every decision, both big and small, knowing that our actions have impacts beyond our boundaries. We protect and restore our ecosystem to make it healthier and more balanced for future generations. So that really is the framework and the strategic plan that the City Commission has adopted. And they adopted that plan back in October of 2020. So now we have the challenging work, now that we have the plan in place, of actually implementing that. As you can see noted here, one of the first things we did after the City Commission adopted those outcomes and commitments is start to work on performance indicators. So we have identified at this point about 70 performance indicators that really help to articulate and identify what success looks like for each of those outcomes and commitments. And we actually presented those to the commission just a couple weeks ago. So now that we have those key performance indicators in place, we are starting to shift our attention internally to developing the strategies that we will need to utilize so that we can make progress towards the successful implementation of our strategic plan and those key performance indicators that we have identified. So I think this is where the work gets really exciting. It's still underway. I think this is also where we can really start to engage with our different commissions and advisory boards and really start to make progress on these different things. So that part is still in development. So there will be more on that to come in the relatively near future. But that kind of gives you a rough kind of estimate of where we are today and all of the work that has already been done. So we are continuing to move down that process and really hoping to start to engage with these different strategies as we start to develop and build our 2022 budget, which will be happening here over the next couple months. So with that, I'm going to shift over into kind of the budget overview. First, kind of talking high level about what we really hope to accomplish when we put together our annual budget. give a little bit of background, a little bit of history there, talk a little bit about the current year budget, so the 2021 budget, and then I'll give you kind of a snapshot of what can be expected related to our 2022 budget. So we're always working in multiple years as it relates to the budget. So first, at a very high level, the budget process and the budget is really intended to do multiple things. Ultimately, is to align with our strategic plan and the strategic priorities that we have identified. And really to help, it really is a framework to identify funding priorities and to have those conversations with kind of that bigger picture in mind. The other thing that it does is really help to contextualize all of our financial decisions with policy direction that is needed in order to have things move forward. And the other thing that it does, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is it gives us an opportunity to look a little bit longer term in terms of where we see things going and some of the things that we have on the horizon. We do this particularly with some of our capital budget items. But like I said, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail here in just a minute. There are also a couple of just kind of key elements to kind of set the framework for this discussion. When we talk about our fiscal year, it aligns with the calendar year, which makes it a little bit easier. So when we're talking about the 2021 budget, it's from January 1st of 2021 through December 31st of 2021. And the budget, as we refer to it, really includes several different components of it. So we have our traditional operating budgets that all of our departments and operations utilize for their day-to-day functions. We also have our capital improvement plan, our maintenance plan, and our vehicle and equipment replacement plan. This is a little bit newer. 2021 was really the first year that we broke those three elements out, but it helps kind of, like I said, contextualize each of those, and we're able to kind of move that conversation forward. So that is relatively new, but I think a really good step to help make things a little bit easier to understand. So we'll first go over, like I said, the 2021 adopted budget at a very, very high level. But that budget includes total expenditures of $314 million, just over $314 million. And it maintains our current mill levy rate. So that is essentially keeping our property tax rate flat. This chart again shows our revenues at a very high level. So as you can see here, taxes make up about 35% of our total budget. So this includes both property tax and sales tax. You can see the next highest, well, I guess charges for service is actually higher. So think of water and wastewater charges that you all pay, trash service, parks and recreation programming, all of those sorts of charges that you may pay. And then you can see other financing sources is the next largest section here in this pie chart. So those are really transfers, and that really has to do more with how we budget things kind of on the back end side, but that's what that's representing. And then intergovernmental, so these are capturing federal and state dollars that we receive for and services and those sorts of things. We always include this when we talk about the budget. Well, so when you 4 different places, so some of it goes to the state of Kansas, some of it goes to the school district, and then the other portion goes to the county, and then finally the other place that it goes is to the city of Lawrence as well. So when you pay that $1, this is how that dollar gets broken out across all of those different jurisdictions. All right, so moving over now to the 2021 budgeted expenditures. So as you can see here, the largest expenditure category that we have is personnel. So we provide a lot of services, and so personnel is our largest cost. You can see the others are a little bit closer in nature in terms of the second largest is capital outlay. So those are all of our capital projects that we have, followed by contractual services. So those are professional services that we have, utilities that we pay, those sorts of things, followed by, again, transfers, which has more to do with how we budget things. And then the next highest category is debt service. So a lot of the infrastructure that we build, we actually issue debt for that and pay that off over the course of a number of different years. So this is just kind of recognizing that annual payment that we have for those projects. All right, so getting into the capital improvement plan, and we'll talk about the capital improvement plan, we'll talk about the maintenance plan, and we'll talk about the vehicle and equipment replacement plan. But first is our capital improvement plan. This is really a tool that we have and we've had in place for a number of years that looks at a 5-year time horizon and is really an opportunity for us to prioritize projects over that 5-year time horizon and identify the needs and also identify the funding that we have available to figure out what of those needs are we able to fund and where are those gaps still existing. One of the things that we've done to help with this prioritization process last year is adopted a prioritization guideline document. So this kind of outlines the process that we utilize to identify basically a score for each project to determine what the highest prioritized projects are within our capital improvement plan so that we can do a better job of funding the highest priority items. So the projects that you will find in our capital improvement plan are really those that have to meet a couple different criteria. The first is they have to cost $100,000 or more, and they have to have a life expectancy of 2 years or more. So those are really the two major criteria for all of our capital improvement plan items. So you can see here that the 2021 through 2025 capital improvement plan was over $239 million. This was just the funded component of that plan. We also had about $15 million of identified projects that were unfunded. I wanted to show you all, just so you had it available to review. These are the different categories in our prioritization guidelines. So these are the different components and elements that we look at when prioritizing all of our capital improvement plans. So some of this you'll see some overlap with some of those commitments we talked about, but it includes looking at the project as it relates to our other long-term plans we have in place, like the comprehensive plan. It looks at health and public safety elements. It looks at the infrastructure needs, whether or not it is something that is helping us meet our regulatory compliance, whether it has external funding, so is the state or the federal government or some other entity helping finance that particular project. What is the ongoing operating budget impact? If we're putting in new infrastructure, we then have to maintain that infrastructure. So what does that impact look like? It also talks about quality of life and what impact the project will have on that, how important that location and timing is. So this is where we start to answer those questions of, if we're going to tear up a road, should we replace the water line underneath it at that time as well, so that we're not having to come back a couple years later to do that work, and having those conversations and figuring out how this project aligns with that. And then it also helps to identify and address the equity component as well as the sustainability of it. And there are more robust definitions for all of those that if you're interested in, I can show you where all of that information and documentation is. Next is our maintenance plan. So this plan outlines both our routine and preventative maintenance. projects that are $50,000 or more. These typically are very programmatic in nature. So we have an idea of how much we need to maintain different types of infrastructure and assets, but we may not know the exact location when we're putting together these documents multiple years in advance. So these typically are kind of seen as programs. And our maintenance plan for 2021 through 2025 was just shy of 130 million. And we had about 33 million identified, but is currently unfunded. And then finally, I promise I am wrapping up with just a couple more slides, is our vehicle and equipment replacement plan. So this includes all of our vehicles and then machinery and equipment and software that's over $20,000. So you can see in 2021 through 2025, this was about $35 million, and we had about 7 million that was identified as unfunded. So that was all talking about 2021, the year we are currently in. However, as a city, we are quickly shifting our focus into development of the 2022 budget. So we have to have that adopted by August 25th with a couple exceptions. So this is the process that we will anticipate utilizing for that 2022 development. So in May, we plan on going to the commission at their work session to give kind of a budget presentation, kind of a forecasting presentation, if you will, where we're able to look at kind of our revenue projections and where we think we're going to be, talk a little bit about some of those prioritization discussions. And then in June, come back with our capital improvement plan, our maintenance plan, and our vehicle and equipment replacement plan to give the city commission a recommendation related to those different elements of our budget. And then follow that up in July with the full city manager's recommended budget, which really focuses more on the operating side of the budget. Then in July, later that month, one of the key elements that the commission has to do as part of our budget process is to identify the maximum expenditures that are allowed. And then following that, we have our formal public hearing and then ultimately our adoption of our budget. So this is really looking forward to 2022. And then finally, I just wanted to give you all some links to some additional information related to the strategic plan and our budget. So the first one is really our strategic plan landing page. The next one is related to our operating budget. And then the third one is really related to our capital budgeting. So I wanted to make sure that you all had those resources available to you all. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I will take a bit of a pause and would be happy to answer any questions that you all may have after that long presentation about our strategic plan and our budget.
This is Commissioner Collette. Any questions from other commissioners? Looks like Charlie.
Commissioner Bryan, MMTC. I just wanted to get quick clarification about the maintenance plan. Are there items that we might be familiar with that are part of the maintenance plan? For example, street maintenance or any of the sidewalk repair work?
This is Danielle, but Buschkoetter Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. Yes, I believe both of those are have at least a component in the maintenance plan, particularly our street maintenance program, which I think you guys do look at. I think we currently have the sidewalk program in our capital improvement plan, even though it is more programmatic in nature.
Is there a reason? This is Commissioner Collette. Is there a reason for the sidewalk plan to be in the CIP rather than the maintenance plan? Is that Is there some history behind that?
Yeah, this is Danielle Buschkoetter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I would say a couple things. One is this is the first year we've had kind of the 3 plans. So there's a little bit of tweaking that I think we will see in the 2022 through 2026 versions of that. You may see that change coming up. I think initially it was because we were utilizing those dollars in some instances for enhancement and kind of new sidewalks. And so we kind of defaulted and said, you know what, that's kind of a new asset. So we'll keep it in the capital improvement plan for the time being, whereas the street maintenance is really centered and focused on maintaining the infrastructure we already have. But that is something that we'll probably look at again as we bring forward the 2022 version, just to kind of clean that up a little bit. So we will continue to have some of those conversations.
Other questions from commissioners? Yes, Nick.
Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. Going back to the strategic plan, Danielle, I was wondering if you could give a couple of examples of strategies that were part of the previous strategic plan, just to give folks an idea of what might be coming with the new one. And on that also, is there maybe going to be some kind of public solicitation process like there now is with the CIP?
This is Danielle Buschkoetter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I'll start with the first question. Our last strategic plan was structured very differently. So we had the outcome areas, we called them something different, but we had those outcome areas. And the other element of the strategic plan we had in that kind of first iteration were priority initiatives. So that's probably what you're thinking about. And some of these were things like reviewing our advisory boards. There were some, I think East 9th project, street project was in there. There were a couple others that I can go and pull up. But that's how that was kind of structured. So this is structured a little bit differently. The strategies that we're talking about now aren't necessarily new and additional things that we want to do in the next 3 to 5 years. It should also encapsulate the work that we're already doing and capture those programs that we already have in place. So I think it will be structured quite a bit differently, kind of in that regard. And kind of getting to your second question, we will be taking those to the City Commission again to have some of that conversation about are these the right strategies? Are we kind of looking at this in the right way? I think as we talk about the development of this plan overall, we really wanted to focus on getting that public engagement on the front end so that it could be incorporated throughout the rest of the process. So I anticipate bringing this back to the commission and having a lot of that conversation through the budget and kind of having that be kind of the level of engagement that we have as we kind of continue to build this out.
This is Commissioner Collette. So I can understand it a little bit better in terms of the process that you're using for developing strategies. Who's involved in that and how is that happening exactly?
Yeah, great question. Danielle Buschkoetter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. We have identified and put together teams for each of our outcome and commitment teams, predominantly made of city staff members. And those are really the teams that are being tasked with putting together these draft strategies for the City Commission to consider. So those are really the 10 or so folks, give or take, are making up those different teams for each of our commitment and outcome areas.
And the timeline for having those together, is that before the budget, or what timeline are you looking at?
Yes, Danielle Buschkoetter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. that is ultimately the goal. We really want this strategic plan to inform our 2022 budget development process. We are in the process of developing those now so that we can kind of present those at least in draft form to the commission and to the public before we bring forward the city manager's recommended budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess this is Commissioner Collette again. I guess in thinking about it, we've been talking this year, we had a retreat in February and developed goals and objectives, and Dave has been giving us guidance, and we've talked about aligning our goals and objectives and looking at key performance indicators and aligning that with the strategic plan, as well as Plan 2040, Transportation 2040, making sure that those all come together. And so I guess I'm interested in what those are going to look like, because I mean you mentioned one of the strategic plan areas as one that we would be most interested in. But really, when I look at those different areas, there are a number of those that that have some relevance to multimodal transportation. And so I think it's going to be a big job to kind of tease that out and select those that really represent the kind of work that we need to be doing for the rest of the year. And the 70 indicators, you mentioned those have been submitted. Is that on the strategic plan page?
This is Danielle Buschkoetter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. They just went to the City Commission, so I don't know that the link is there. And I knew someone was going to ask that, and I didn't realize it until about 5 o'clock when this meeting started. So I can send Dave the link. Dave, if you wouldn't mind sending that out, it will be on that strategic plan page
Right.
probably by the end of tomorrow.
Right. Other questions from other members of the commission? Yes, Steve.
Yes, I just want to compliment Danielle that your presentations are always excellent and very clear. And I think I could probably take a pop quiz and pass it without even studying. But I really, really appreciate your every year you come to us, and it's very professional and very understandable. So thank you for that. One comment that I'll have, and I think we've talked about this in our goals, in our planning is, and Dave, you might want to chime in on this. When we do get an agenda item, it would be nice to see some of the stuff with respect to the mission and vision and strategic plan, and also the budget kind of filtered for us. So we can, refer to these documents as we're preparing for our meetings. I know you do that for the city commission items, and that's just a comment that I think that would be helpful for us too.
Yeah, this is Dave Cronin, the engineer. I think that's a good point.
And as we put together our memos to point out the different outcomes that our items support is good to note, because the work that we do is with this board is the same, on the same train as the whole city in achieving these outcomes. And so, yep, we've noted that, and we'll consider that here as we move forward with items that we bring forward in the future.
Great, thank you. I'm all set, Pat.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you, Danielle. I think the other comment I'd have about your professional presentations is also the speed with which you can get your name and your whole title out in your introduction is really impressive.
I've had a lot of practice with that. I appreciate it. Wonderful. Danielle Buschkoetter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I always appreciate being able to come to this board and kind of do a version of this every year. I think it's certainly worth the time, and I appreciate that you all are interested in it as well. So if there are any questions after this, please let me know, and happy to provide any of that guidance that I can. So thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
This is Dave Cronin, City Engineer. Danielle, thanks for attending, and I think this is great timing as we
move forward with, I guess, adopting our goals for the year, and we've kind of tied those into different outcomes of the strategic plan. So it's really great timing, and thanks. And I'll be sure to send out a link of all of the 70 performance indicators to everyone here following the meeting. So
Great, thank you. Thanks, Danielle. This is Commissioner Collette. That's the conclusion of our study session. So I'd like to take a 5-minute break before we reconvene for the regular meeting. So it's 5:47. So let's come back at about 5:55, let's say. Give us a little more than 5 minutes.
I think it's 6, so we're ready to go. Commissioner Collette, we might do roll call once again for the regular meeting and then get going. So, Ally?
Alrighty. Allie Weems, MSO. Charlie Bryan.
Present.
Gregory Critchlow.
Present.
Steve Evans.
Present.
Carol Bowen.
Present.
Nick Kuzmiak.
Present.
Tom Allen.
Present.
Aaron Payton. Lauren Freeman. And Pat Collette.
Present.
That's 7 and 2 absent.
Okay, are we ready to go? Call the meeting to order. The first item of business is to approve the minutes from the March 1st meeting. Are there any corrections or comments on those minutes? And if not, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I move to approve the minutes from our March meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
Nick
Second.
Kuzmiak, MMTC. Oh, you got it, Carol.
All right. You need to call the roll again?
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Allie Weems, MSO. Charlie Bryan.
Yes.
Gregory Critchlow.
Present.
Oh, Steve Evans. Steve.
Commissioner.
I'm sorry. Yes, I approve them.
Okay. Carol Bowen.
Approve.
Nick Kuzmiak.
Approve.
Tom Allen.
I approve.
And Pat Collette.
Approve.
All right. Passes unanimously.
Thank you. Next item, this is Commissioner Collette. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone present physically?
This is Dave Cronin, City Engineer. There is no one present to speak under public comment.
Okay.
And we did not receive any indication of anyone wanting to speak or anyone that we see online.
Okay, great. I don't see anyone present, so we'll move on. Next agenda item is to discuss the MMTC goals and approach for completing the work. I believe that David attached the goals and objectives as we had presented them at the last meeting, and we hadn't received any comment at that time. So we're using that as the basis for the discussion tonight, with the expectation that we'd like to formally vote on approval for those goals and objectives. Any general comments or questions at this point? I have a couple of things I'd like to say about it, I guess, just in terms of, when I look at this list, I really see the highlights generally as aligning with the city's strategic plan, formalizing community engagement, ensuring equity, measuring performance, and ensuring collaboration with other key city community stakeholders. And, the presentation that we just heard from Danielle, that's kind of embodied in the city strategic plan. So in terms of the goals and objectives that we developed, I think we're in a good position in terms of starting out, at least, of matching up with the city's strategic plan. But what I would like is if we could just kind of go around the room, so to speak, and have each commissioner just identify, one of these goals that really, basically that you see as, something you would be really behind championing for the coming year, and whether that's, eventually that we put together a subcommittee to address a particular issue, or really to work through some of these objectives, but just to kind of get a sense more specifically of the areas that you would be most interested in working on individually. And of course, as we'll work on it as a commission as well, but there may be some other things for the year that, in terms of really taking it forward. So I guess I'll just use the screen as as my round table and start with Commissioner Allen. Do you have any thoughts about it?
Well, I think one thing that I'm interested in terms of connectivity is really continuing to support some of the bicycling efforts, but more in the areas that maybe have less connectivity. So I think that's one of the things that I would be interested in focusing on.
This is Commissioner Collette. So kind of more specifically, is that do you see that as embedded more particularly in any of these particular goals and objectives?
Yeah, well, maybe I guess maybe come back to me. I guess I'm trying to like formulate. I feel like I'm on the spot here, so come back to me in 1 minute. So
sure. Yeah. Sorry.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I'd be happy to.
Okay. Great.
To just start some discussion.
Great.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that we received a public comment from Mr. Thornburg. He's a longtime contributor to some discussions in our community about bicycling infrastructure. And I was trying to think about how we might be responsive to his comments. In the past, he's often made remarks about bicycle parking. His comments this time didn't really address that. But I thought the goal around making transportation a part of the unique identity for Lawrence and the objective regarding reviewing peer communities might be a way to kind of position some of his interests around bicycle parking that he's had over the years, and then his interest in trying to address bicycle theft and the safety stop. Perhaps those are things that could be part of a peer community review process. And I thought it would kind of be useful for us to understand better about the bicycle laws that are available to us as a city in Kansas. Sometimes things such as the safety stop are preempted by a state law. I'm not sure if that's the case, but often when you start looking around the country and seeing things that make you kind of get excited about what we can do, I need to better understand what state law allows us to do. So I was thinking, this one is an intriguing one for me, that making transportation a part of what makes Lawrence unique. I think that is already something that makes us unique, but there's probably more we can do. Bicycle parking is one thing that seems obvious to make us more unique. I don't know about theft, if there's some special program we could do, but anyway, that's just my thoughts, kind of trying to incorporate his feedback and also just our goal around making Lawrence known for bicycling.
Mm-hmm. This is Commissioner Collette, Chair of MMTC. The bicycle theft comment, when I reread the letter, you really talked about some metrics around it, that we, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence about bicycle theft. We know it's an issue, but we don't know I mean, I don't think there's a metric around that to know exactly what's happening and if it is significantly increasing. You know, I certainly know people have had their bicycles stolen, and you specifically mentioned, Nick, and your experience with bicycle theft. So, I mean, whether there's something that specific that we can act on, but, you know, at least the metrics around it to know, you know, what the extent of the problem is would be one possibility.
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. I believe our police department does keep track of that data. So if you were
Interested in just having an understanding of the data or the numbers, we could certainly provide that, and then maybe that'll help you. Maybe we'll see something in that data that is important. So we could look into that a little further.
Commissioner Clark, that sounds great.
And Jessica Mortinger's on the line too, if there's questions on that or anything else that may also, that she has input on for data that we may have, she can chime in.
Yeah, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager for the MPO. We've had some staff level conversations around bicycle theft as part of our staff team for multimodal transportation. We have since gotten a new police from a law enforcement liaison on that group. And so I think we can take that back to that team and have a conversation about their process and procedure. If it's a future study session you want to hold, to hear more from them about how they handle theft of bicycles as property and or bicycle registration, which we have regulation for in ordinance, but I'm not sure how much in actuality we have programming for registering bicycles. And so there could be some work done, I think, on that front. In regard to that, I saw a recent post by the city of Topeka, who's using a new national partner that allows people to register thieved bikes, and partnered with the Topeka Police Department to help recover stolen property. And they had recently recovered a bicycle, and we're highlighting that on social media. It's where I saw that. But I think there's some more work that can be done there if that's something you're interested in exploring.
Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. I kind of wanted to add on to Charlie, what you were saying, and Pat, this is sort of in regards to, I feel like we discussed this, but I'm not seeing it in the minutes, that there was maybe a bit of self-homework, at least that I pointed to myself, to try to figure out on all these goals and individual action items on them, whether any of them were amenable to forming kind of a small task force, working group, committee, whatever you want to call it, to kind of get it done with more people who are kind of more specifically devoted to that task instead of trying to accomplish that in these larger meetings. I think by dividing and conquering, we may be able to get a lot more done this year than we have in previous years. Like for example, in I guess 2019, we tackled, let's see, parking and access and loading standards. We tackled the micro mobility ordinance. I feel like something else. And those groups met maybe once every 2 weeks or so as needed, but it was only maybe 5 people, and we were able to get a lot more done in kind of that small group setting. So what I would recommend for this, and I may or may not have gone over this last time, but would be that a couple of these goals are amenable to that small group format, and a couple are even potentially appropriate for having external stakeholders on those groups as well, depending on the legality of that with COMA and whatnot. So for example, when I was looking through the one that Charlie, you were saying, the unique identity for Lawrence, I was thinking that sounds like the kind of thing where we can involve, Mr. Thornburg or even Mr. Allman, who as part of their passion, basically research and even visit these cities that do have an unmistakable transportation identity, and maybe avail ourselves of their passion and their expertise to try to, make our job easier, but also get more direct citizen input. So I don't know what y'all think about that, but I don't know. As Steve likes to say, I'm a process guy, and at this point, I'm trying to think of the process for how we want to actually accomplish this. So, Pat, I'll leave it up to you as the chair here, but just as that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nick. This is Commissioner Collette, and that's really the genesis for having the discussion about having people identify which of these they feel most passionate about and would be most interested in working on. David and I have had some conversations about that. You know, you'd sent an email about, you know, the possibility of starting with something like the, you know, a subcommittee that could work on putting together the your turn session so that those could actually happen. And then this other one with a unique identity that, you know, since it does take some research to, you know, look into other communities and what's going on, that would be an ideal subcommittee too, as what you mentioned. Dave cautioned us, and Dave, maybe you want to weigh in on this, just in terms of the ability to support too many subcommittees at once, you know, so phasing those in to make that happen, you know, and so, but perhaps Dave can give us a little more guidance on that. And I know we talked about the involvement of other people outside of the commission, and I don't know that we that we understand, you know, clearly how that could be done or if that can be done. Dave, do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, I would just caution on setting up a number of committees all at once, just depending on the staff capacity that's needed to help, depending on, you know, what the topic is. And, you know, certainly committees can also seek input from members of the public, and if they're subject matter experts in a particular area that needs to be involved in reviewing the goal of the committee, could certainly be included in that review. So yeah, I think we're just trying tonight to identify maybe a couple of you know, top priorities that we can just begin discussing how to approach that, whether it's committee work or maybe a study session to get more information and then determine you know, if a committee is needed or how to go about that. So yeah, we're open. I just wanted to caution that we just wanted to be cognizant of staff time, that we, you know, to help facilitate the meetings.
Pat, I would be happy to chime in whenever. I would like to hear from everybody too, but
Great, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
well, I think that overall this is a great document. It's manageable and you can find stuff, and it clearly documents what we talked about. The two that pop out to me would be foster coordination between MMTC and community stakeholders, and elevate equity in transportation decision making. And I think they're very closely connected. I know Charlie has been a proponent for as long as we've been doing this about more public involvement and how can we be doing more of that and doing a better job at that. And when I think about our role and our mission, it's to enhance the ability of the city commission to do what they do. And getting community input, both for ourselves and for the city commission, is a big deal for us. That's kind of our job, if you want to look at it in that way. And so if it's your turn, I think everybody's really kind of excited about how that went. And, you know, I think that's definitely a good format. But when Joey Hensler talked to us, he said something I'll never forget. And it's like, who's not able to be here? You know, I mean, who in the community out there is not able to come to our meetings, to give us input, to talk to us about, you know, their lives in this community? And I really think that we can help figure out how to do that. And I'm not sitting here tonight thinking I've got a great idea on how to do that. Maybe other people do, but I think, you know, we can really raise the bar for community involvement here in maybe a non-traditional way, you know, away from the, you know, the tables and, you know, and very, very effective things like that. I'm not being critical of them, but I just think if you can bring more of the community people and the people that don't come to city commission meetings and don't come to our meetings, maybe don't even know they exist, how somehow we can connect with them as well as, you know, the obvious choices with other community people. So those are my two. But I think overall, this is a great document. We just got to use it.
Exactly. Thank you, Steve. This is Commissioner Collette, and kind of tagging on to your comments and how I kind of see a lot of this interrelated. You know, two of our objectives, or one of our objectives, was to have 2 your turn sessions through the year. And because equity came up a number of times and sustainability a number of times, it made sense to look at the possibility of maybe having thematic your turn. So one around equity issues and another one around sustainability. What do people think about that?
I think it's a great idea.
You know, just thought that it would be a way to focus our discussion. You know, we could have still a number of stakeholders, or, you know, look at ways to get people, just like you said, Steve, that, you know, that can really provide the input that we need. You know, I think the questions that, I don't know who put those together with the your turn session that I went to in January, whether that was you, Nick, but I thought those questions that were asked of the stakeholders were really great questions and really led to some very fruitful discussion and some insight on the, you know, the link between those organizations and the things that we do. You know, so we might want to look at those again, and maybe thinking along the lines of those themes, maybe they need to be tweaked a little bit, but you know, that it would make sense to be able to put that together and really help us move forward on these goals that are around the equity issues and sustainability.
Commissioner Critchlow, may I speak?
Yes, please.
Expand on that. So, you know, I would be interested in both the equity, but also the identity of Lawrence Transit, because I think at some point they I think the identity covers a lot of the issues that we're talking about on the goal planning. But I'm not terribly familiar with the Your Turn project, but I think if you're looking at to reach some of the equity voices or equitable voices, is that something maybe even more informal, as in people who are using multimodal transit, such as buses or things of that nature, and having kiosk at bus stops or incorporating into the transit system itself. And so there's not you eliminate the kind of opportunity to have to go to a formal setting where you're already at that point. That's an idea. But in terms of the identity and the equity as well, is that connectivity from Lawrence and beyond the Lawrence borders. How does that start to look at employment? Do people have to get to employment beyond Lawrence? Is there an opportunity to start looking at those issues of the multimodal transit extending beyond that and making that easier as well? I think I had expressed in a couple of meetings ago about coming from Boulder and having those similar size and identity as Lawrence, but having those shuttles taking people outside of the community to be able to experience beyond the border at that point. So that those are a couple of points that I think that I'd be interested in investigating and working on as well.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I think that, you know, that whole connectivity, you know, and again, that's something that has come up in the city's strategic plan, and it's something that, that we've talked about, and really matches up, I think, with the work that we would want to do. And I do think it fits into that community identity slot, in terms of really looking at how other communities have done a good job of incorporating all of those elements.
May I go and jump in again?
Sure, Tom.
Tom Allen, Multi-modal Transportation Commissioner. So, I mean, I think, sorry, I hadn't pulled up all the lists here when I was speaking earlier, but so I think what I was trying to address was also the equity in transportation and linking back into some of those other issues. And then the other thing that I'm also continuing to be interested in is the environmental impacts. And I think really part of that is also just thinking about current trends in our administration and our current president, and how we can maybe hopefully leverage some of the things that might be happening into what we're doing. So I feel like I tend to stay up to date with a lot of different things related to that and sustainability. And so I'd like to see how maybe we could start to pull in some of these future opportunities into audits. So.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think, there's some exciting things coming from the federal level in terms of, new directions and, more support for multimodal transportation, it seems like. And I'm hopeful that that's the case. It seems to be going that direction. So, being aware of that certainly is something that would serve us well.
Commissioner Bowen, every time I hear someone speak, I change my mind about what my priorities are, because they all sound good. I'm really impressed with the comments that are being made. But what I'm sorry, I can't stop that darn thing. I'm thinking about the overall picture. The Traffic Safety Commission, you had an item, you took care of it, you recommended it to the City Commission, and you say, I did this. But now we're supposed to make recommendations to the City Commission. We're not doing that. And I'm looking at these goals, which are wonderful, but what is the product? What actual changes are we making that we can recommend to the City Commission?
So this is Commissioner Collette. So Carol, within the goals and objectives that we developed, do you see a way of shaping that? I guess, for me, being there are a couple of them that really address the key performance indicators, and so the city has those key performance indicators. The Transportation 2040 has those. Plan 2040 has those, and really looking at our role and developing some performance measures for us as a commission, and that at the end of the year we can show some progress along those lines. So I don't know what that looks like yet, though. Because I'm so new to the commission, I'm not quite sure in terms. I mean, there are a lot of things that that I see as far as things that are coming up in response to, having some input, like, basically, some input into the transit route design and some of the, the interface with some of the other, groups, but really being able to kind of nail that down a little bit in terms of what shows that we've made progress in this year.
Kuzmiak, MMTC. It seems that I think we've mostly gone around and stated our priorities, and I realized I might be the last one. So to rectify that, I would say I really think that community engagement and equity is a huge priority. But I think, Pat, the original question you asked is which one would you be interested in heading up? And I don't think I'm necessarily as qualified as some others on this board for that. What I do think I would be qualified for, however, is the one about assessing environmental impacts of projects reviewed by MMTC. So I think by starting to better engage with the Sustainability Advisory Board and to also be integrating the City Commission's approved 5 sustainability principles, I think that that's the kind of stuff that we could start doing fairly quickly. I mean, these deliverables would basically be kind of tweaking our agendas to more reflect how we're addressing city goals. So, and just starting the conversation with Sustainability Advisory Board. So I think those are fairly easy turnaround items that could be done with either with just a single person or with a small committee. So just throwing my hat into the ring for that one.
Great. Yeah, we have on the, we have on this list, on this document, as far as study sessions, is meeting with a Sustainability Advisory Committee. So that, that could be a starting point with, with doing that and looking at the ways to, to integrate that within some of the things that we're doing. And, kind of going back to discussion with Danielle and with David's comments, and I think you suggested it, Nick, was in terms of our agenda items, identifying on those, the strategic, how they fit within the strategic goal. But I think, additionally, how they fit in with the goals that we have here. So just monitoring our progress on these goals with each of the items that come up on the agenda, and how are we addressing those as we go through the year, and checking back, quarterly or something along those lines, so that we see we are making progress, and that there's some documentation of that, because we go along and remembering what we did in January, when you get to December, there's a lot of things that happen, but having some sort of a documentation that really shows that progress would be helpful to me.
Kuzmiak, MMTC. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably what the output of that particular initiative is going to look like, is that it's going to kind of start things. It may not necessarily be a deliverable. And that reminds me of, Carol, what you were saying about, what exactly are we going to be doing about these? Are we going to be creating certain recommendations for the city commission? And I think for some of these initiatives, that answer is absolutely. I think there are certain goals and subtasks here that will probably directly feed into, staff, we would ask you to do this. City commission, we highly recommend that you do this. Other advisory board, here's what we think you should do. But I think with something like this environmental impacts, strategic initiative here, it'll start the conversation. And I think we will find through continued interaction with the Sustainability Advisory Board that we may uncover, more concrete deliverables that we didn't necessarily know were going to happen in the first place. So I think all these initiatives are kind of different in their deliverability, if that makes any sense. And this one is a lot more nebulous at this time. So I think as we uncover more, we should hopefully be able to kind of find our purpose, as it were, when it comes to environmental stuff.
This is Commissioner Evans. Pat, I just have a few comments to make here. I want to go back to what Carol said. I think it's really important. I think that this group needs to have something to hang our hats on. And that can be specific actions and recommendations. And that's part of what we do. I've probably driven that over the years as much as I could. And now, after the your turn, I'm thinking, gee, that's something we can do that's not kind of a nail on the head or something real specific. It's more general, but just as important. So I guess what I'm saying is that would be one area that I would be interested in, looking at a little closer. And based on what Gregory said, I'd sure invite him to join me if that's something that that would be dear to his heart and something that would we could work on together, I think that would work well.
Commissioner Critchlow, I would agree.
Great, thank you. This is Commissioner Collette. But kind of back to, Carol's comment too. We've had suggestions, in terms of looking at the subdivision standards and standards for bikeways intersection design, in terms of some of those kinds of specifics that, would be recommendations, potentially recommendations to the city commission. And, so there are some opportunities there, as far as kind of looking at some of those issues as well. I mean, and it fits in with, I think, a number of the items that we're talking about here. And perhaps, kind of, we talked at the beginning as far as the recommendations as far as the safety stop or the yield to stop standard, and the bicycle parking and looking at bicycle theft. Those are all kind of specific elements to work on, but within creating this identity, this unique identity for Lawrence for multimodal transportation and support of bike ped and other bike ped transit, and really that connectivity within the city. And if you look at the list of performance standards in 2040, I pulled those up to kind of remind myself, and so there are some specific measurements for bike ped, but then there's also the safety elements, and so those are all elements that we should be looking at. And certainly as the precursor, as Transit Safety Commission being a precursor to this commission, and so one element certainly of what we're looking at in terms of transportation safety, that should be on our radar.
This is Commissioner Evans again. Real briefly, I think Pat, it looks to me like we are zeroing in on 3 of these items. And I think it's kind of natural that they're maybe more actionable than some of the other stuff that talks about reviewing, participating in a transportation 2040. All those things are great, but these things seem to be maybe a little easier to get down to the nitty gritty on. I do think that another one that I think Gregory brought up was the unique identity. And I'd probably point that as to, if I were going to pick my top 4, that would be one of those top 4s in no particular order. And I hope it's appropriate, but on my citizen hat, I'm dealing with a group of people that are looking at some transportation issues, primarily with bike and ped development in town, that would bring a definite unique identity to town. And so I think, there are citizen groups out there that are doing some work in that regard too. So those 4 would be mine. And I'd be happy to look at the one about coordination between our group and community stakeholders with Gregory. And if we do get to public comment, I think Michael might want to add to what I said too. So it's all for me for now, Pat.
Great, thanks. This is Commissioner Collette. So, Steve, you said, okay, we're zeroing in on 3. What are your 3 that you're seeing as far as this discussion? I mean, the unique identity.
Oh, are you asking me, Pat?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Unique identity. Well, those 4 right there in a row. Foster coordination between MMTC and community, assess environmental impacts, and elevate equity in transportation.
Okay.
Now, those are mine. Other people need to chime in here too, but those would be, to me, that would seem the most actionable and doable at a committee level and something that we could have an impact with.
I'm kind of this is Commissioner Collette, kind of going back to, Dave's caution about forming too many subcommittees. I mean, I think some of these, could be a subcommittee, and others that we can start to deal with them in a study session. So it might not be, might be a start, and then we could phase in a subcommittee later in the year to address it, but that we might want to start out with just one or two to begin with, and to get us going in that direction. And I guess what I would see is I would really like to get the your turn sessions kind of put together, with like I said, the theme of equity and sustainability, and then maybe a subcommittee that could start the peer review of other cities in terms of that unique identity. And that's going to, I think that's going to take a little more time and effort to, to really get, something useful put together that we could start, that we could really start working on and make recommendations, for those elements. What do the rest of you think about that as an approach?
Commissioner Crislow? I think it's a valid approach. Just the comparison to other like communities, we just have to be careful that we understand all the participants that are involved, because sometimes they might look very similar, but there's these nuances, both citizenship-wise and administration-wise, that makes the difference between the two. But if we look at the embedded infrastructure, I think that could be the comparison between other communities that are doing forward thinking with their transit opportunities. And when you say the investigation as a subcommittee, I believe that's what a subcommittee can start to understand. Is understand what are those infrastructures and what makes them more feasible in that community versus Lawrence, and how Lawrence can make it feasible for itself as well. But I think that's part of the investigation. It's just the careful understanding of that research, not just saying that can't be done just because it's being done somewhere else.
This is Commissioner Collette. Exactly. I think those are really good comments and good cautionary. And again, the city strategic plan, in terms of the unique identity. So there may be some things in there that we can build on, in terms of what they're looking at. But I remember from the work on the bike ped task force that, we were, looking at peer communities, and it's a struggle to find, for everything to line up. You have to be really careful about, what elements you're looking at to compare your city to, and find things that would be feasible to implement.
Commissioner Evans again. Pat, I think your recommendation is on the money. I think that starting with one and not four makes the most sense. I think I'd vote for your turn / equity, although I do want to connect those, but I think that's one that we could get off and running here in the next couple of months if we work on it.
great. I think that's.
Commissioner Bowen,
Uh-huh.
whatever we choose to do, I think we ought to make a practice of keeping these things handy and making anecdotal notes at the end of every meeting. Things that might apply and we can elaborate on later.
Commissioner Collette, are you anecdotal notes on the goals and objectives? Is that what you're referring to? Okay, I understand. Yeah, the ongoing record of how we're, because even like we said, making notation on the agenda items, for how we see that fitting with what we're doing. Okay, I think our order of business might be first to have a vote on accepting the goals and objectives as they were presented here, to make sure that we're all in agreement with the content and whether there's anything else that needs to be tweaked. And then I would like to get volunteers for a subcommittee that would be looking at the your turn session on around the equity issue. And I haven't looked at we would need to figure out when we would want that to happen. I guess we can have the subcommittee kind of identify a target and kind of within what we already have set up with study sessions and what might work best. But I think 3 or 4 volunteers, probably. I mean, 3 might be enough, but if there are more people who want to work on it, I think that's fine, as long as we're less than 5, and then we can move forward and then come back to it next month, and we can talk a little bit more about moving forward with a timeline for subcommittee for for the unique identity, but kind of heeding David's call for for not launching a bunch of these subcommittees. So start with one and move forward.
Hey, Kuzmiak, MMTC. I just wanted to go over a couple things just to make sure I'm following along correctly. So first up would be a your turn / equity committee that would immediately start working towards scheduling at least one of those. Eventually, there would be a second committee that would study transportation practices in other cities that could be adopted to create a more unique identity for Lawrence transportation. Is that correct? Were there any other initiatives that I thought we'd said 3 or 4, but I don't know if I've been paying attention closely enough.
Well, this is Commissioner Klett. I think the other thing is then, because we're talking about 2 your turn sessions, one on equity and one on sustainability, we could do, and I think that still could happen, but we could start with include a study session with the Sustainability Advisory Committee, and then, expand on that, based on that study session to see if there are some additional issues and bringing in some other stakeholders for that discussion.
Okay, Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. In that case, that sounds like something that might almost be happening simultaneously to these other efforts. I mean, if you want, I can offer to reach out to Jasmine and whoever is the citizen leader of the Sustainability Advisory Board to get that conversation started at least, and maybe kind of prep them for a study session sometime the next 3 to 6 months or so.
Yeah, this Commissioner Klett, that sounds fine. I think we just can look at our calendar. We'll get to that and look at the calendar. We can either pick a month, or we can leave that open for now until you have a chance to have that discussion and see what might work for the study session, and then get that on the calendar. So.
Yeah, this is
City Engineer. I'd like to just jump in and say that staff can help facilitate some coordination with other staff and boards on timing and schedule. I'm not familiar with what is, the workload sustainability advisory committee currently and their schedule and being able to do that coordination. So I think this is a good conversation. And I think a lot of this is, we got the year to do it, to complete this work. And it's just a matter of working through schedules and ways to do that. So I'm definitely heard the priority of the your turn equity conversation and sustainability, and we can start working to help facilitate how to get these meetings and discussions going. So we could come back and, or if we do create a committee to look at equity and issues and come up with questions and identify those that you'd like to, you see as stakeholders to invite to a your turn conversation, we can then work with that committee to find the best way to get it scheduled.
This is Commissioner Evans. I think I need to add a little, maybe I was a little misleading here, but the communication part of this in terms of a connection to the equity part of this, in my mind, doesn't cover everything under the equity category. Basically, I'd be talking to people like the director of equity that's listed here, and maybe even Joey Hensler, in trying to identify how more people can get in front of us to talk to us about their lives in the community. And so it's not a broad look at equity, is not what I had in mind. It was just a piece of that in terms of the communication aspect of it, if that makes sense. That's what I was thinking in connecting those. So there may indeed be a broader point where there's a group looking at equity.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Collette, and I think you're right. There's one in terms of the inclusion of voices in those decisions, and then the other one is in terms of, as we're making decisions, what elements need to be included to make sure we're being equitable in our recommendations and decisions.
Right, right.
Because on as we make each decision, we're not going to have access to all of those groups. I think we need that input and that that process. But as we go through our as our decision making, and what elements do we need to include in terms of equity?
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. I guess if you would look at the objectives under the
Elevate equity and transportation decision making. Is there any objectives that you would see that we would need to add?
Well, maybe this Commissioner Evans, maybe as we get further into it. I can't think of anything I'd add to this at the moment. I think it's a great start, but most of these things are going to evolve some, I would guess.
This is Commissioner Collette. I think if we make it through this list of objectives, we're going to be making some good progress, I think. And I think other things may be generated from that discussion and those efforts, but that might be unknown to us yet until we have more discussion around it. But all right, well, I guess at this point I'd like to entertain a motion for accepting the goals and objectives as developed at our February retreat and further refined by the commission.
Hey, Kuzmiak, MMTC. I almost forgot. Michael almost had his hand up for a while. It may be good to get public comment before we go into a vote.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry, I should
sorry.
have mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I was, Michael, would you like to make your comment? I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. I would indeed. And I do appreciate Mr. Kuzmiak suggesting it before the vote. I know you want closure. You want to wrap this up, and that's understandable, of course. I, however, am going to be a bit of a curmudgeon here and recommend that you do not vote on this. So thanks for the timing. I want to thank Carol Bowen, particularly. What is the product? That is the elephant in the room here. There's great content in this table. I have no fault with the content at all, but I do find it very lacking in what the focus is. If you're not going to list actual goals, actionable items, product deliverables, whatever, real functional goals, this is it's only partial. I know that you have these goals in the back of your minds. You've been talking about several tonight, and you have them there as what you're thinking that this might lead to. But why are they in the back of your mind? Why aren't they at the very front of this list? What you have here is kind of what staff directed and framed the discussion at your retreat. It's functionalities and its procedures. Everything listed here as a goal is a functionality, a procedure, a process, not a deliverable. If you really want some goals in here, put them in there. Make one more column that has a goal, and everything in this table will be supportive, will be the steps that you take to the goals. And I'm thinking of some of the things you mentioned already, but a complete bikeway network. Isn't that our goal ultimately? And then the objectives, wouldn't that be something like 5 miles of protected bike lanes a year, or $2 million worth of bikeways, or something like that as an objective? Another objective could be coordinating with the Sustainability Advisory Board to identify, areas for bikeways. Those are objectives, but the goal is the bikeways themselves. Similarly, revised subdivision regulations, which you mentioned again, street design standards, that's an actual goal. Or a bus fleet that's 100% electrified, that's a real goal, something tangible. So I strongly urge you to step back for one more study session, revise this table to actually list your goals, real goals, and then everything else in the table is process and objectives. That way it would carry meaning. People could look at it and see what really you're intending to do. So anyway, that's my suggestion. And if you want to take a step back a bit and then 2 steps forward next month, whatever, I think it would make it much more real. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Other comments from the commissioners?
Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. As much of a concrete engineering guy as I am, sorry, not an actual structural engineer, but an engineer who looks concrete results, I think I'm going to have to push back on that because much as the city needs to first have their goals set before they start to articulate exactly what the concrete outcomes are going to be, I think that's sort of the direction that we're trying to take here on the MMTC. And that is to make sure that we first have our ducks in a row in terms of exploring what other stakeholders require of us and where those synergies could take us in terms of actually informing the end goals. I think if we had to very quickly jot down our 5 most wanted transportation things in Lawrence, we would probably come up with similar things. But we may be coming from a position that is different from others in the community. So I think until we start talking to the Sustainability Advisory Board, the Planning Commission, the whatever other groups and stakeholders end up being involved in the equity discussions, I think it's going to be hard to say this is what Lawrence needs. I think it might be, until then, this is what the MMTC commissioners are pretty sure that we need, and staff, because those are the voices that we hear so far. So I know it can be frustrating to seem like we're so close to actually getting some goals down on paper, but I really think that this is going to be the year where we can kind of buckle down and, within these discrete initiatives, figure out what the goals should really be, informed by the stakeholders who are going to, be affected by them the most. So I don't know if that's just a good way of passing the buck with fancy language, but I'd be interested to hear other commissioners' thoughts on that.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I have to agree with you, Nick. I think we're in a space where, I kind of agree with Michael as well, but we can play semantics around goals, objectives. I think what we're trying to do is get clear on what our priorities are, and trying to make progress on those priorities is not going to be nice and tidy. It's going to probably look a little messy, especially if we're trying to do better at engaging the community and what we think are the priorities. What I'm hearing is we think it's important for transportation to be part of our unique identity, that we look to how do we improve on the environmental impact that transportation decisions make, and how do we ensure equity in transportation. To me, those are the three that I heard most in this discussion tonight, and I feel like the issue around using your turn is more about a particular tactic to advance that priority. I kind of would say it's not going to look nice and tidy like maybe a well-developed strategic plan would, but it's a step toward making clear to the community what we think are priorities, and trying to deepen our engagement with the community on those priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Other comments?
Commissioner Bowen. I too agree with both. I guess my original concern with the goals and objectives that we set out is that they're all great, but is it all talk and no action? Because you don't really see a product. On the other hand, what Charlie says, we can't assume what the product is until we've talked to people. So perhaps what we ought to be doing is incorporating, getting a sense of the community where it thinks it should be in each one of our goals.
This is Commissioner Evans. I guess I do agree somewhat with Michael, but in a way, I do see goals and objectives. And when I look at environmental impact, hold a joint study session to identify work that may impact both boards. That is something specific to me, and that's not a PowerPoint. That's okay. What are we working on that we can overlap with? And I do see in the second column some goals and objectives and some measurable things that we can do. So I'm very comfortable with making a motion that we accept this document and start the subcommittee work with staff helping us along the way to get that organized.
Thank you, Commissioner Evans. We have a motion. Is there a second?
It Kuzmiak, MMTC, I'll second.
Thank you. Alec, or is there any further discussion before we move to a vote? All right, Allie, would you like to call the roll?
Allie Weems, MSO. Charlie Bryan,
Aye.
Gregory Critchlow,
Yes.
Steve Evans,
Yes.
Carol Bowen,
Yes.
Nick Kuzmiak,
Yes.
Tom Allen,
Yes.
and Pat Collette.
Yes,
All right, it's unanimous, 7-0.
thank you. So this is Commissioner Collette, the second part of that, then I would like to have some volunteers for a subcommittee to look at setting up developing a your turn session around the issue of equity. Do we have some volunteers for that? Steve? And Gregory? Great, thank you. Any,
And I'd like to make a request that, Dave, could you see if our Director of Equity could join us for what may be a kickoff meeting, if you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, City Engineer. Yes, Commissioner Evans, we can do that.
Thank you.
And I might add, I don't know if we necessarily need to form like an official committee or subcommittee on this. Maybe if I can just work with Commissioner Evans and Critchlow on the your term form, and that might be the best way to go about it versus forming an official committee.
okay,
Kuzmiak, MMTC. I may add that you may want to send an email out to the commission because Aaron and Lauren aren't here, and it's possible that they may want to be involved as well. Maybe, I don't know.
yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Sorry, Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. One more thing. While you're reaching out to Dr. Muhammad, you may want to reach out to Evan Corinta as well to get him involved. If this is going to be equity focused. But it doesn't all have to be at the same time, I suppose.
Great. Okay, is that, this is Commissioner Collette. So Steve and Gregory, is that feel like enough direction at this point to move forward, have a meeting with the Director of Equity and to get that put together? And then Dave, I guess in terms of timing, for as far as a study session for that issue, that would be something to work with you, to look at the best timing for that.
Dave Cronin, City Engineer. That's correct. If we do decide to do the your turn during our study session time, we'll check schedules and timing.
Right. All right, I think we're ready to move on to staff items.
All right, Dave Cronin, City Engineer. A couple of things I wanted to note. On the adult crossing guards, we had a discussion last month at the study session. We presented the data around the adult crossing guards that we looked at through the Safe Routes to School plan with the criteria that's been established on whether or not different crossings met the criteria or not. And we listened to your input for that meeting, and so we're going back and looking at the data to determine a couple of things. One is how, tying back into the equity discussion, how environmental justice areas and free and reduced lunch populations would be impacted by the locations that did not meet the criteria. So we're looking at that to provide some more information other than just did it meet the criteria or not. And we're also looking at the thresholds as well, and how close it was to meeting the criteria, and maybe those are ones that when we look at the school area traffic control policy and how we apply the adult crossing guard criteria within that policy, there may be some need to or a recommendation to keep some of those locations that were closed that didn't meet the criteria, and reevaluate those maybe more routinely or get more data. And we're also looking at some areas in the context of the locations where maybe we have gaps in the network that may also impact some of the data. So we're working on that here. Staff's working on that to bring recommendation back on that here, I believe in June, with the school area traffic control policy. And the other item that I wanted to mention, the 27th Street Extension project, the City Commission decided not to proceed with that project, and we've pulled the project from the capital improvement plan in the budget this year. So we had identified a couple of commissioners to help serve on a steering committee for that meeting. It was Tom Allen and then Catherine Schartz, who was on the MMTC last year, were nominated to that steering committee for that project. But as we are not moving forward with that project, we're not moving forward with the steering committee. So just wanted to note that for those that were not following that project. So that is the two items that I had under staff items. Thanks.
Commissioner Collette, thank you, Dave. Next item on the agenda are commission items, and we have two specifics, and we can open it up to any others. But the first is the PTAC update. Is that from Nick?
Sure. Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. I can give just a brief overview of what happened at the March meeting. So the transit center, or the transit hub, I think it's now being called the multimodal transfer facility. I believe there's a A&E firm, architecture and engineering firm, either currently in contracting or has been selected. So I think in early March it was still in flux, but I'm assuming by now they've probably selected somebody. So that project is moving along, and I forget exactly what the timeline is, but I think at least by the end of 2022 we should see something constructed. So that's exciting. That's a lot of years in the making there. There was also a discussion of the fair donation policy. I forget if I brought this up last time, but the idea behind that is that nonprofit organizations throughout Lawrence are eligible to apply for donated fares from the city. And this is basically so they can provide those to the people that they serve to more easily get around the city. In the past, the program wasn't particularly well advertised, so only a few organizations knew about it. It was also first come, first serve. So large and well organized organizations were able to kind of swoop in and grab as many passes as they possibly could, while other organizations either weren't able to because there weren't enough to go around, or they just didn't even know about the program. So in the previous meeting in February, we had decided on some recommended changes to the program based on Adam Weigel's, I think, kind of assessment of what had been going on. So we recommended that we double the amount of fare box recovery that was donated. So it was 1%, now it's 2%. We also changed that from that percentage of the previous year's fare box collection to the rolling average of the last 3 years. So that was done to mitigate the effects of COVID on severe drop-off in ridership. Because otherwise, that means that in 2021, where we might need free fares the most, we would have the least amount of donations to work with, simply because 2020 was such a bummer of a year for mass transit. So that was change number 2. The third change was that we were not going to do it in, I think twice a year. There was going to be, the request will go out to everybody, and instead of first come, first serve, the amount of passes allotted to each organization would be proportional to the amount available versus who applied. So say 10 organizations applied for 100 passes. Those 100 passes would be divvied up based on, I I forget exactly how it works, but say they all requested $100 worth of passes. Well, they would all get the exact same amount. But if one organization may have requested $1,000 worth of passes and another only requested 100, then the former would get 10 times the amount of passes. But everybody would be kind of even Stevens in regards to how much of their requests would be fulfilled. So we thought that this was a good way to mitigate the problem of large organizations like Salvation Army, for example, swooping in and getting all the passes. So now smaller organizations like the Ballard Center or Willow Domestic Violence Center could have a much better chance at least getting something. So anyway, I feel like that was a fairly successful decision that we made. We'll see how it goes, but so far so good. So that is it for PTAC.
Commissioner Bowen. Nick, I have a question. Last time you mentioned something about grocery carts were not allowed on the city bus. Is that going to continue? That seems to me to be an equity issue.
Yeah, we got rid of that. Sorry, Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC. Last time, let's see. So the past cart policy was that you couldn't do it basically. So now we have changed it to at least just allow bus drivers to exercise discretion. So if it's a really, really crowded bus and you're bringing 8 carts of groceries, probably that's not going to work, right? But if it's an empty bus and you want your cart to be right next to you or in the aisle, you know, it's fine. Bus drivers will give you some slack. So I think there's no official change to the ordinance, just direction to operators to, you know, kind of be subjective about it.
Great. Commissioner Collette, thank you, Nick. The next item is the Transport Route Redesign Committee update, and I believe, Carol, you are the representative. Did you have a meeting in?
Charlie and I both are attending meetings.
Okay.
So Charlie, jump in anytime you want. The meetings are every month, 4th Tuesday at 5:30. Adam Weigel is the person in charge from the city. The link is lawrencetransit.org. There had already been one report of suggested routing strategies produced by the KU Urban Planning Department last fall. But we have a consultant working with Route Redesign, and they've set up the steering committee, and we have a consultant. I did not catch the consultant's name, and I didn't find it on the website. So David, you might mention that to Adam if you get to him before I do. There were at least 20 people at the meeting. And basically what we did was a lot of brainstorming, listing concerns, ideas, that sort of thing. And if you folks, any of you want to send me email of things you want me to take back to that commission or that committee next time, I'd be more than happy to do that. Equity issues, that I would think that would be an important one. And accessibility routes, how close it gets to your neighborhood and that sort of thing. Charlie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you did a good job. It was Shockey Consulting, I believe, that's involved in the project.
What was it?
Shockey Consulting.
Okay.
SHOCKEY.
Okay, thank you very much. This Commissioner Collette, other commission items from other commissioners? I don't see any others.
Commissioner Bowen, I do have one comment on the safe routes to school and the pedestrian crossings. And I've brought this up for years. It does not make sense to make decisions for pedestrians based on pedestrian volume, because the pedestrians are not going to come out unless it's safe. So counting them as a decision-making tool does not make sense. So I'm glad the city has decided to take an overall look at it, because we should be patting ourselves on the back if we put something into place and we increase the pedestrians. It works in reverse.
Thank you, Carol. Other commission items? All right.
They're going.
Yeah, go ahead.
List going again.
Right, that's all right.
Last time I made a comment about online surveys and it was rather brief, so I thought I would elaborate. The most famous case I can think of was when Dewey won the presidency by a landslide. And what had happened was the polling was done by telephone, and a majority of those folks were going to vote for Dewey. As it turns out, Dewey supporters used phones, but other people did not have telephones and they still voted. So the president turned out to be Truman. And the Chicago Tribune had printed up their newspapers in advance, dropped them off on the sidewalks that night, and then had to pull them all in the morning. So now we have a similar situation where we are not really surveying the whole city, not even close. We're surveying people who have access to the internet, people who are interested in following the city, and people who have a specific interest in whatever we are trying to survey. So what I'm trying to say here is we cannot take, collecting all those numbers is interesting, but if you don't have the time, don't do it. What's more interesting are the anecdotal comments. They provide a lot of information. Now I'm done.
Thank you. All right, the 2021 calendar.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. The next meeting, which is scheduled for Monday,
The 3rd, we had tentatively planned to do a little more in-depth discussion on our GIS dashboards and transportation data. So I know in the past we've sent out a link to our GIS map. We have kind of developed that MMTC map with the data that's commonly used to review projects. And we've heard in the past just a need to maybe look a little deeper into how we use the data, what all data there is, and I think this may even tie into some of the objectives from our goals that we just talked about, reviewing some of our data. And so we'll keep that tentatively in there for May the 3rd as we work to see when we can get the Your Turn meeting scheduled for a study session. In addition, at our regular meeting, we are planning to bring the 2022 to 2026 bike ped funding plan. So that is a plan that follows our non-motorized priority policy to prioritize projects with the bike ped funds that are budgeted for next year, and then outlay a plan for the next 5 years. So most of you are probably familiar with that, so we'll be bringing that at the next meeting. I think here pretty soon the public call for projects will be closed on bike ped projects. Right now there's a open call on Lawrence Listens for people to provide input on projects that that we can use to help in our planning process. In addition, we have the 2021 Neighborhood Traffic Management Program funding plan. We're working on providing a recommendation on the allocation for the budgeted dollars in that program for this year. The current program, which is still ongoing, the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program utilized funds from 2020. So this is going to be a recommendation for the dollars this year, which I believe is $250,000. Is that right, Dustin?
I think it's 300 a year now.
300? Okay, sorry, $300,000. So those are the two items that we have so far for the regular meeting on May the 3rd. Let's stand for any questions. I guess if I may just jump back in to the regular meeting, June the 7th, I had put in there the recommendation to approve the school area traffic control policy. I know we just kind of discussed about the adult crossing guards, but I forgot to mention, we did send out to all of the commissioners the times and locations of the adult crossing guards. So at our last meeting, I think there was some interest from some commissioners on wanting to go out and out into the field and physically see the situations and conditions of the locations where we have adult crossing guards, to see if there were other things that may impact some of the decision making on having adult crossing guards on those locations. So we did send those out. I know schools, they're back to meeting in person, so we got the crossing guards are out. So if you are interested in that, we sent out the list of the times and locations. If there's any questions, feel free to get in touch with us. And that is all that I have for calendar. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. This is Commissioner Collette. We've reached the end here. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Says Commissioner Evans, I move that the meeting be adjourned.
Okay. Is there a second?
Commissioner Critchlow, second.
Thank you. All in favor? I think we've established that we can raise our hands to adjourn. All right. Looks unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. Good work tonight.